Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development about the report that they have just tabled. We've got 5 MPs before us and a 6th one on Zoom. We'll start with those in the room. The speaking list has changed slightly, but I will start with the chair. Please, everybody, introduce yourself when you start to talk. We'll take questions afterwards dans les deux langues officielles, I'll update you on how much time we have in this press conference. So we'll start with the chair, MP Ali Assassi.
Thank you for that, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ali Assassi, and I am the chair of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Here with me today are the committee vice chairs, MPs Garnet Genuis and Stéphane Bergeron from the Conservative and Bloc Québécois parties, as well as the New Democratic Party's Foreign Affairs and International Development critic, Ms. McPherson, who is joining us remotely. Before giving them the floor, I'll just make some brief opening remarks. Once we've all finished, we'd be happy to take any questions you may have. Now, earlier today, I had the honor of tabling in the House of Commons, our committee report, "The Russian State's Illegal War of Aggression Against Ukraine." While our committee released a short statement shortly after Russia launched its full-scale invasion, this represents our first comprehensive response to the grave injustice that continues to unfold in Ukraine. It is called an interim report because I'd like to emphasize that we do intend to remain actively seized with this issue. The report makes 15 recommendations to the Canadian government that cover wide ground, from the imposition and enforcement of sanctions to the pursuit of justice for Russia's crime of aggression and other issues that are of pertinent interest. The report's core findings are expressed in our recommendation that Canada must provide significant financial, humanitarian, and military assistance to Ukraine so long as Ukraine must defend itself against Russian aggression. These recommendations reflect our collective determination to respond in a serious, steadfast, and unified way to the gravest foreign policy challenge we have faced in decades. As the report makes clear, while the path ahead may be difficult, we already know that our ultimate destination is Ukraine's victory on Ukraine's terms. I'll now hand it over to MP Garnet Genuis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here. This is an important report and reflects a consensus of all parties on the committee. Speaking for the Conservative Party, we are certainly proud to endorse this report and all of its recommendations. Our party did also supply a supplementary report which identifies a number of additional steps that we are proposing. One key area for us, and it's spoken to throughout this report, is the issue of Canada's contribution to global energy security. Now, Canada has the potential to help our European partners, also democracies in East Asia, to reduce their dependence on energy imports from Russia. And that's why we feel it's very important for us to be applying tough sanctions to Russia, but also expediting energy-related projects here in Canada so that we can play our role in reducing that dependency and supporting our allies in their pursuit of energy independence from the pressure that the Russian state has been able to exert, and also depriving the Russian state of the resources that come through energy revenues that they've been using to fund their aggressive war. Unfortunately, rather than expediting these energy projects, we saw the extension of special permits for the export of Gazprom turbines, effectively what could have potentially facilitated continuing energy dependence on Russia. Russia. And that's why, as part of this study on Ukraine, the committee did extensive work around the question of whether or not it was a good idea to provide those turbine waivers. We were pleased to see the government withdraw those waivers, and the committee supports that withdrawal. Although our recommendation was to further recognize that waiver should never have been extended in the first place. Those are some of the additional recommendations that we've brought to the table around recognizing Canada's special contribution around energy security. Other recommendations that we were very pleased to see around holding Russia accountable for the crime of aggression, and also recognizing the role that the Wagner terrorist organization is playing in Ukraine, but also in Syria, in Africa, in other parts of the world. And we strongly support the call for the listing of the Wagner Group as a terrorist organization, and we hope that the government will implement that recommendation. It came from a unanimous motion in the House, as well as this report. So this report, as well as our supplementary opinion, provides a great deal of material for the government to hopefully use and implement to support Ukraine and work towards that critical victory for Ukraine, for democracy, and for freedom. Thank you.
We go to MP Bergeron.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, first of all, I'd like to stress and point out Mr. Sarai is here and Ms. Bandayan, which is with us today or on our committee. I'm here today, Stéphane Bourgeois from Montarville and VP of this Foreign Affairs Committee. I come here with divided feelings. First of all, pride in what we have accomplished through our committee and the tabling of this report in the House of Commons today, but a sentiment of a certain amount of embarrassment. As you may have noted, on issues that my colleague has just mentioned, I'll come back on that in a moment. The majority of our members here are unanimous in the 15 recommendations contained in the report. To my mind, it would have been possible to table this report earlier, more efficiently, and have the government benefit from our observations and recommendations much more quickly. The commitment was taken hostage by partisan issues, which slowed down the work of its deliberations for several weeks, and we were unable to finalize the report any more quickly than we did, which I find deplorable. Our Ukrainian friends, our Ukrainian allies, were counting on us to act with responsibility. And on that score, I think we have failed in that task because we've done extraordinarily good work, but we were unable to go about it more quickly. So I would stress once again, we've worked on a consensual basis, and we agree on the essence of this report, which should have given us a report tabled much earlier than it was. I'll come back now on some of the comments made by my co-chair, co-vice chair, I should say, Mr. Genius from the part of the Conservative Party. If there's one thing that this aggression has shown is the extreme dependence of our Western economies on hydrocarbons. And if there's one thing that the Europeans have fully understood from this conflict is that we have to get out of a carbon economy as quickly as possible. I think that we're living in the past if we tell the Europeans, we'll supply you with hydrocarbons, with energy, in what you've lost, which you were getting from the Russians. To the contrary, I think we have to work hand in glove so that we can progress towards a true greening of the economy, find alternative energy sources, which are in fact ecologically green and try to put behind us this obsolete economy based on hydrocarbons. I thank you all, and I thank my colleagues, of course, for the long work that we have done. And of course, as the chair has pointed out, this is not yet complete. We have to maintain vigilance on what is going on right now. And in the next few days, our committee will be going to Sweden, Belgium, Poland, and Finland to continue discussions with our allies to see what more we can do to better support our Ukrainian allies vis-a-vis this conflict against an unwavering aggression, which is a threat to their independence, their freedom, and also for us as a democracy. Thank you very much.
Now, before we go to questions, I presume the best way to proceed would be to ask the NDP critic, MP McPherson, if she would like to make some introductory remarks as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And actually, I would very much like to. And I do want to thank everybody for being here today. As my colleagues have mentioned, this is a very important report, and it is accumulation of some important studies that we have undertaken. I do want to reiterate what the chair mentioned, that this is an interim report, that this committee will continue to be seized by what is happening in Ukraine, the illegal invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation, and will continue to push for the Canadian government to do everything it can to support the Ukrainian people. Of course, I should say that I'm incredibly proud that we were able to do this work. I think that there is an awful lot of collegiality and unanimity within our committee on the need to do everything possible for the people of Ukraine, to help them ultimately take back control of their country and their sovereignty, and expel the Russian Federation and Putin from their sovereign territory. I wanted to highlight a few points of the report that are very important to me. I think it's important for us to recognize that, of course, the ultimate goal here is a peaceful Ukraine where civilians are no longer being targeted, where genocide is no longer being committed against the Ukrainian people. And I think it's also important to recognize the impact that this conflict, this war, has had on Ukrainians, but also people around the world in terms of the food crisis that we are seeing, the energy crisis that has been alluded to many, many times. Canada can do more to help. Canada can step up in terms of how we enforce our sanction regime. We can do more to help with things like demining, so that we can continue to support the Ukrainian people as they live through these very, very hard and terrible times. I think there's also a role for Canada to play to make sure that we are helping with long-term support. You know, this is not something that will be that Canada will enter into for the short term. We need to be there as Ukraine rebuilds their country after this war. And I'm very confident that all members of the House of Commons stand with the people of Ukraine as we work together to make sure that happens. Thank you very much, and I look forward to questions.
Merci de vos interventions.
Thank you for your comments.
One question on the line so far. If you're watching the Zoom, please use the raise hand section if you're not able to spot anybody. So we'll start with the, we will not, I am being... Okay, so no one has raised their hand in the Zoom room. I apologize for the technical difficulties here. So I will go first. I'm Dylan Robertson from the Canadian Press. I just wanted to get the chair's comment on what we've heard from Mr. Bergeron right now about some of the difficulty of getting this report out. I mean, your last witness was in October. What does this say about the ability of this committee to function?
Thank you very much for that question. That's a very good question. As you know, I think it's important that we remain focused on the fact that there was robust arguments and all of the members participated in this process of making sure that we could adopt a report that would be endorsed by all the members, and that's exactly what we accomplished together. However, as Mr. Bergeron has indicated, there were some challenges getting there. And from my perspective, I can just simply say that I think it would be fair to say that various different factors contributed to that delay. But that certainly does not, should not distract from the fact that this is a very robust report and that all of us agree that we should be steadfast in our support of Ukraine and that we will continue to support them as long as it takes. As to what those challenges were, I don't think it would be fair for me to delve into that. Mr. Bergeron is the one who has raised this issue, and I think it would only be fair that you ask him what particular challenges he's referring to.
Vous êtes le bienvenu, Monsieur Bergeron, si vous.
Feel free to chime in, Mr. Bergeron. Well, the chair is quite correct in pointing out what we must stress today. What's important to stress today is the unanimity of the committee members as to the recommendations of the report concerning this conflict. My comment was only an expression that I find that this excellent report arrived so late. You yourself have pointed it out. Our last witnesses were heard in October, and we should have been able to present the report much sooner. We were distracted by other issues, other considerations, which caused the fact that we couldn't just concentrate on the content of the report until just quite recently, and this is why we are presenting it today. It does not minimize in any way whatsoever the quality of the report, of the actual collaboration that we, in fact, generated to arrive at this report and its recommendations. My only regret was that we couldn't have acted more quickly. As the chair had explained, it is an interim report. And insofar as we couldn't complete this first initial report, interim as it is, we can't give a follow-up. Now, we're going on a mission to Europe in a few days. This should have occurred in the spring, earlier in the spring, perhaps even late last summer, if not this fall. But we're about a year late in our departure. And this is due to the fact that we had these minor delays and glitches in presenting the report earlier. Now, if we want to act in the fashion that the Ukrainians would have hoped that we could, we have to set aside our partisan differences and concentrate on the actual objective. And this report is nonetheless an excellent report. And I think it's good enough to stand alone. Now, while the Conservatives would have added a few extra things, well, they have every right to have that point of view. But this report has the consensus of all our political parties. And I hope that the government will use every means possible to decouple any obstacles to full support of our Ukrainian allies.
My follow-up question is about diplomats, Russia's diplomats here in Canada. The recommendations there to reduce their presence and to crack down on anyone who's not following, normal diplomatic protocols. And I'm asking this to everyone here today and on Zoom, if you had any thoughts about the transparency aspect, because it goes over the bicycle incident, and we know that there wasn't a police charge in that. It's hard to know for sure. I mean, we can guess who did what here, but in terms of what Russia's diplomats are actually doing in Canada, there didn't seem to be a recommendation looking for more clarity on that front. It was more to expel people who are misusing this. And I'm just wondering if you could walk through some of the thinking about, do we need more transparency in that regard? And if that was discarded just because it's diplomacy and it's hard to get that sort of transparency?
Thank you again. That's a great question. I think that given some of the things that we have seen in the course of the last year, it is important that we continue to operate with eyes wide open. However, the recommendation that was unanimously adopted by all the members of this committee was that we should ensure that every Russian diplomat, which is posted to Canada, continue to operate within the parameters of their diplomatic responsibilities. And in the event they do not do so, that it is incumbent upon us to consider the possibility of expelling them. So the recommendation is very well tailored. It's very well considered. And again, it suggests that we should continue to monitor things very, very closely and to provide every assurance to all Canadians and Ukrainians that we will stand by them and make sure that they can freely express all of their concerns, that they are not intimidated by any officials, whether Russian or otherwise, and that we will keep an eye on developments as they unfold on Canadian soil.
Sure, I'll throw to Ms. McPherson and come back to the room. I think you're unmuted, Ms. McPherson.
Oh, I think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. I think it's very important. You know, what we have been seeing from some of the Russian diplomats has been appalling. You know, whether that be social media posts or other actions. And I do think it's vital that the government does everything possible to hold those diplomats to account. You know, at a time when Canadians are rightfully very worried about foreign interference, intimidation of Canadian citizens and others who are in Canada, the role of misinformation and disinformation in our country, I think it is vital that we are examining how the diplomatic staff within the Russian embassy are contributing to that and what needs to be done to make that stop.
Yeah, Dylan, thank you for the question. I think it's an important one. Just briefly going back to your previous question, I'd just say I'm a glass half full kind of person. I think it's great that we have a strong report that reflects the consensus of the committee. Obviously, we've added some thoughts in the supplementary report, and I don't disagree that it's always desirable to move faster. But look, I think in terms of the report itself, this is an important report, a strong report, and it will have an impact. When it comes to your second question, I think one of the problems we've seen with this government is a gap on implementation. So in principle, everybody's prepared to say, we want to have sanctions, we want to expel those involved in foreign interference. But then there's been a gap in terms of actually implementing that. So in the 8-odd years this government has been in power, I don't think we've seen any instances of diplomats being expelled as a result of involvement in foreign interference operations here in Canada. So there's been a lot of discussion about those kinds of operations. I think it's well known that they happen and that there's involvement of diplomats. But there has not been that kind of response. This recommendation is similar to a recommendation in a report in the last Parliament from the Canada-China Committee with respect to Hong Kong. And again, there have been no expulsion. When it comes to sanctions as well, I think one of the issues the committee needs to look into is not just who's been sanctioned, but how is the implementation of that sanction, those sanctions going. I mean, again, another example, but is the position of the government of Canada. We're not going to want to import products made by slave labor, and not a single shipment has been stopped from China in association with those prohibitions on forced labor. And then we talk a strong game on sanctions, but then this waiver is granted with respect to Gazprom turbines. So we need to look not just at the intentions of the policy, but at the implementation. And that's why when it comes to combating foreign interference, our supplementary report underlines the need to go further, to actually make sure we're implementing these measures, not just talking tough and saying, how dare you, we're not allowing that involvement, but we actually ensure that the government is identifying people that are involved in foreign interference and expelling expelling them if they're part of the diplomatic corps.
Je ne sais pas si, en quoi le rapport complémentaire
Well, I don't see how the supplementary report by the Conservatives is going to force the government to act differently or faster. We already expressed to the government we expect action vis-a-vis the Russian diplomats. And I would add that when a government, such as is the case for the Canadian government currently, that they would hope at the end of the process to arrive at a negotiated, diplomatic result. I think we have to maintain open our diplomatic channels, because if you expel your diplomats, their diplomats, what other tool do we have remaining to us on the diplomatic front? Well, we can't use nuclear arms. I mean, once we've expelled them, there's nothing else we can do for dealing with them. Obviously, we have to hold them accountable for their actions and react accordingly if those behaviors or if the Russians go above and beyond their diplomatic responsibilities and mission. So we'd like to send them a strong message. We need to find a negotiated diplomatic solution, but we can't at the same time close all communications. We can't maintain communications open and have no means of communicating. Because there's no communications right now between the government of Canada and the Russian diplomatic staff that's here in Ottawa. So why keep them here? Well, because maybe we're trying to keep the door open for diplomacy, but diplomacy is a two-way street. What negotiations, what discussions does the government of Canada propose with the people that are here, with the Russian embassy staff, so that we can give, a signal to the Kremlin that action is required? We can't affirm on the one hand, we have to maintain open channels of communications, and on the other hand, not use them. And this is the situation that we find ourselves in now. Several people, yourselves included, should we not just expel them? Well, we have to maintain the communication channels open. But why, if we're not going to be using them? If we want to be serious about the issue, we have to use all available channels, all available means to incite the Russians to put an end to this totally illegal, illicit invasion, this war. And generally, one goes through diplomatic channels, but right now they are not being used, neither directly with Russians abroad in Russia or Russians here in Canada.
Mr. Chair, you had more to add. You were signaling.
Yes, absolutely. I just wanted to add to what Mr. Bergeron said. He made reference to the supplementary page and a half that were provided by the Conservative Party and suggested that perhaps this was an issue they could have elaborated on in the supplementary report. I would definitely agree with Mr. Bergeron. In addition to that, I would add that the several recommendations that are made in the supplementary report provided by the Conservative Party, none of those issues, to the best of my understanding, were never actually shared with the other members of the committee. I think the better approach would have been for the Conservative members to have at least proposed those measures to the entire committee and determine if there would have been support from all the members. So that's one thing I wanted to add to what Mr. Bergeron said. The second thing I would add is, as you understand fully, we will not hesitate to do anything that is necessary to ensure that Ukraine knows that we stand fully beside them. And when it comes to Russian diplomats, I think the really important factor to bear in mind is that we are a country that does not act in an arbitrary or rash manner. And all of the considerations that were raised by my colleague are issues that we are considering. They are issues that we discuss with our other allies because we think it is imperative to act in a coordinated fashion to make sure that Russia is fully cognizant of the fact that we will never hesitate to stand beside Ukraine and to stand beside the Ukrainians that we have welcomed to Canada. Thank you.
I don't mean to go in circles. I will throw to questions, but I figured the Conservatives should have a chance to respond even briefly if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, the deliberations around the development and finalization of the report, proposals for amendments to it and such, those happen in camera. So I can assure you that none of the positions we've taken in the supplementary report should come as a surprise, but the reality is I can't point you to a record of those in-camera deliberations, and neither can or should my colleagues. I will just say that nobody should be surprised that the Conservative Party strongly supports Canada doing more on the issue of contributing to global energy security. Nobody should be surprised that our party believes that Canada can play a role in expediting energy projects, and nobody should be surprised that we are taking a strong position around the implementation of commitments on combating foreign state-backed interference in Canada. The recommendation that we expel diplomats involved in activities that are not consistent with official diplomatic status, that's one that all of us agree with. Our position is that we need to see stronger enforcement from the government of that commitment. And our supplementary report outlined specifically what you talked about in terms of the bicycle case as being an example that was brought to us at committee. So we've been clear from the beginning on these points in saying that Canada needs to be doing more to contribute on the issue of energy security. We need to be doing more to combat foreign interference. And we think the Gazprom turbine waiver by the government was a big mistake. So there's a lot of areas of agreement here. Again, I mean, glass half full, glass 3/4 full. There are some points where our party is saying the government can and should do more around energy security, around combating foreign interference, and around recognizing what a significant error the Gazprom waiver was.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask the other journalist who's here on Zoom, please use the raise hand function if you would like a question. Maybe you're just listening in. I'm not seeing a hand up. I will ask a pair of questions, and that might be the end of this press conference. So I just wanted to know a bit about sanctions, how each of the parties would characterize our sanctions regime right now. I know what the report recommends, but what I'd like to actually get a perspective on is, is it working at all? Is it helpful? Is it a mess? Is it counterproductive? Is it just political salesmanship? I'm going to start with the chair and go to the co-chairs. Just how would you characterize how our sanctions regime is actually working right now?
Absolutely. That's a very good question. Once again, I would highlight the fact that, to the best of my knowledge, Canada has one of the lengthiest lists of sanctions that have been adopted by any country so far. In addition to that, I think it's important to highlight the reality that all of the sanctions that we have adopted to date are sanctions that we discussed with our friends and our allies, because we think it is imperative that we continue to respond to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine by acting in a coordinated fashion. It is only when Canada and its allies act in tandem that we can ensure that all of these measures are forceful and that they do act as a significant deterrent against Russia and its oligarchs. So I think we should bear in mind that we not only have the lengthiest lists of sanctions to date, but we will continue to examine other ways in which we can punish the Russian regime and Russian oligarchs as well.
I'm going to go to Mr. Genuis, Mr. Belcheron, and then Ms. McPherson.
Thank you. So we support the sanctions that the government has implemented to date. I will say it can be a little bit imprecise to say what is the volume of sanctions, because the critical point with sanctions is targeting the individuals and the entities that you need to target to have the most effective impact. We are on the record for having called for the implementation that some of the sanctions the government has implemented much earlier in the process. Actually, we were calling for tougher sanctions in the lead up to the further invasion. We thought that those could have had a stronger deterrent effect if those had been implemented earlier, and we continue to follow up and call for the government to take additional measures. I think the other issues around sanctions that we need to be tracking are supporting the full implementation of sanctions, and this is an issue that the committee is intending to look at in the near future, specifically the implementation of sanctions, how effective that is, how effective the enforcement is around it, and all parties are supportive, I think, of doing that investigative work and being able to report on that. And then we have sought in this report that the government implement provisions around the repurposing of sanctioned assets and being able to use those sanctioned assets to contribute to the recovery efforts. So supportive of the steps that have been taken. Many of them were steps we called for earlier than they were implemented, and we think there's more work to be done.
Je pense qu'il est important de dire d'entrée de jeu que
I think that I have to start off by saying that we are all in complete solidarity for the imposition of severe sanctions against Russia and its oligarchs. And anybody who is contributing to this Russian aggression towards Ukraine. We not only have to be seen to be acting, but we have to ensure that our actions follow our statements. In other words, that we have to walk the talk. I have to congratulate the work of my colleague, Ms. McPherson, on this. Very often, we will make a statement about sanctions. We will, in fact, impose some sanctions, and yet the results are rather symbolic, because the process for tracking the implementation of these is not solid, not sufficient. We have to work with bankers in order to impose the financial sanctions. We have to discourage Russia from their commercial activities. We have to give them a hard time. The bankers are fulfilling responsibilities which are, in fact, the responsibility of the government, of the state. The results are often not adequate, not sufficient. And of course, we try to impose sanctions in concert with our allies. We consult. We have to also take into consideration the specificity of our trade, of commerce that we have, the assets that the Russians have. So we have to adjust those sanctions so that they be as efficient as possible, so that the oligarchs, those who are in the Kremlin, those who have to feel these sanctions. We've seen, for example, one of the best ways of attacking the economic system of Russia is to use the mechanism of the SWIFT banking mechanism. So rather than doing a transaction with a bank that is not under the control of the SWIFT, they just move to another bank. They won't use a bank that has to depend on the SWIFT system. So the sanctions are not quite as efficient as they might be. And certain sanctions are counterproductive. Canada is one of the only, if not the only, to apply a sanction on cereals and seeds coming from Russia. The result is that our agriculture producers are disadvantaged, and the Russian commodities are much more productive and money making on the international markets. Well, that's completely ridiculous. One of the objectives of our committee will be to review and revise, perhaps if needed, the sanctions regime of Canada to get rid of these inconsistencies and contradictions. We have to have concrete results at the end of the line. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I jump in?
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for the question, Dylan. It's, of course, a very important question, one that I've been seized with for some time, as you know. I'm quite worried about our sanction regime. I'm worried about how it is being implemented, how it is being enforced. I've asked multiple times through order paper questions within the House of Commons, with letters to the minister, asking for more transparency on our sanction regime. As the chair of the committee has mentioned, there is an extensive list of those who are being sanctioned by Canada, and that list is predominantly with regards to Russia, but there are also sanctions. Sanctions are a key piece of our foreign policy with regards to Haiti, Iran, other countries, other areas of the world where there is grave human rights abuses, all sorts of horrendous things occurring. The problem is you can put everyone you want on the sanction list, and if there is no enforcement, if there is no actual transparency on why those people are on that list, when they're put on the list, what's been seized, which assets have been seized, they don't work. And my worry is that at this point, the Canadian government is not doing what they can to enforce the sanctions. So we've seized $121 million to date of Russian assets. That is not enough. I also feel that this is something that the Foreign Affairs Committee needs to look at. That's why I did bring forward a study on sanctions, and we will be completing that study hopefully in the coming months. Sanctions are an important tool. I think we all agree that they are an excellent tool to use to force the Russian Federation and Vladimir Putin to leave Ukraine, but they don't work if they are not enforced, if we do not have a good enforcement mechanism. And our allies recognize that. Thank you.
Thank you. And just the very last question is about the upcoming trip. Hopefully the chair, if you could just enlighten us a bit about who you're planning to speak with and more importantly, the goal of this trip.
Absolutely. The purposes of the trip, as was indicated by Mr. Bergeron, is to ensure that we remain focused on Ukraine and remain focused on how best we as a country can continue to assist not only Ukraine, but our allies as well. So we will be visiting 4 countries. We will be going to Sweden, we will be going to Finland, to Belgium, and to Poland as well. And it's important that we meet with as many individuals and as many organizations as possible. I can assure you that the list has yet to be finalized, but it is a very lengthy list of individuals and organizations because we really want to make sure that we all benefit from this trip and we come back with fresh ideas and that we can continue to work on the situation in Ukraine and contribute to Canada's robust response to the situation in Ukraine.
Good. I think we'll end it there. I don't think anyone disagrees with what was said. I don't think we've got time to add to that. But thank you very much for taking the time here and for coping with our technical difficulties. Have a good day.